In the dark corners of the galaxy, the Galactic Empire's iron grip stretched across star systems, choking the life out of any world that dared to resist its rule. Despite its vastness and power, the Empire feared the rise of a new force, humanity. It had long been known that humans were a uniquely adaptable species, their presence in every corner of the galaxy spreading faster than even the most aggressive of the Empire's vassals could manage. What the Empire failed to anticipate, however, was that their very ability to adapt would be the catalyst of their eventual undoing. The growing influence of human colonies was not simply an issue of territorial expansion, it was a direct threat to the very structure that kept the Empire at the top of the galaxy's food chain. The Empire, in its unyielding desire for absolute control, had long kept a careful eye on humanity. Their scientists had studied humans for centuries, analyzing their biology, their psychology, their unique potential. And in their findings, the Empire discovered something that both fascinated and terrified them. Humans had a latent genetic structure that, under the right conditions, could give rise to extraordinary psychic abilities. Abilities that could turn the tide in any war, abilities that could render traditional military force obsolete. Telepathy, psychokinesis, and precognition were just the beginning of what humanity could unlock if allowed to grow unchecked. Initially, the Empire saw these children as a resource, expendable tools that could be manipulated and molded into soldiers with incredible powers. They devised a covert program, euphemistically called the Resettlement Initiative, which involved abducting human children from colonies far and wide. Families were given no choice. They were promised that their children would be taken to new worlds to receive better education and protection, while in reality, they were dragged into the heart of Empire's clandestine laboratories. For years, the Empire operated these schools, where the children were studied and experimented on, their abilities enhanced through cruel and invasive procedures. The genetic modifications and psychic enhancements were slow, methodical, and insidious. It was not enough to simply harness the power of these children, they needed to be pushed beyond their limits, to be turned into something more than human. The Empire's scientists injected them with strange compounds, conducted grueling tests, and exposed them to psychic conditioning that left them broken and confused. The children, though gifted, were subjected to horrors that no young mind should ever endure. Some of them never spoke again, their minds shattered by the brutal experiments. Others, despite the pain, began to awaken to their abilities, communicating with each other through thoughts, seeing visions of the future, and even moving objects with their minds. But as the years passed, the Empire began to realize that the children were becoming too dangerous. Their abilities were growing exponentially, far beyond what the Empire had anticipated. The children, once compliant and submissive, were beginning to defy their handlers. The telepathic links between them began to form into networks, and the younger children, those still in their early teens, began to show an unprecedented capacity for collective psychic power. The Empire's fears were realized, the children could not be controlled. If they were allowed to mature, their combined power would be enough to challenge the very structure of the Empire itself. The Empire's leadership, ever paranoid and ruthless, decided to act. The psychic power of the children was a ticking time bomb, and the only solution was to eradicate the threat before it could fully manifest. And so, an order was given, the massacre of the 800,000 human children. Publicly, it would be framed as a mercy killing, an act of compassion to save the galaxy from a threat that the children themselves could not control. The masses would be told that these children were too dangerous to survive, that their psychic abilities could lead to untold destruction if left unchecked. But behind closed doors, the truth was darker. The Empire feared that if these children were allowed to live, they would rise up and expose the truth about the Empire's practices. The children knew too much about the Empire's oppression, its true nature, and its exploitation of those under its rule. They had already begun to reach out to their families and colonies through psychic communication, sending fragmented, desperate messages of warning. If the children survived, the Empire's secret would be exposed, and their reign would be threatened. The massacre was swift and brutal. The children, once vibrant and full of potential, were slaughtered by the thousands, their young lives snuffed out in the name of security. the Empire's leaders watched as their order was carried out, ensuring that no trace of the children's existence remained. The bodies were disposed of, the memories erased, and the surviving colonies were left with no answers, only grief and confusion. The Empire publicly declared victory, labeling the entire incident as a necessary sacrifice for the greater good of the galaxy. The children's families were told that their children had been reintegrated into the Empire, their fates sealed by the greater demands of peace and order. But as with every lie, cracks began to form in the Empire's carefully constructed facade. What they did not anticipate was the survival of one child. Amid the chaos and carnage, in a remote facility designed to exterminate the most dangerous of them all, a young girl named Kala survived. She was one of the most enhanced of all the children, her psychic powers already far surpassing any human's natural capacity. However, unlike the others, Kala's abilities did not simply lie dormant, they exploded in the aftermath of the massacre. Her psychic mind reached out, making contact with others in the network of children who were still alive, even though they had been silenced by the Empire's brutality. Kala, though young, understood the weight of her survival. She alone held the key to exposing the truth of what the Empire had done. But in doing so, she would also become their greatest enemy. Her psychic powers could not be ignored or erased. If she survived long enough, she could turn the tide against the Empire. And now, more than ever, the survivors of the massacre had a single chance to escape the Empire's stranglehold. The warning had already begun. They were coming for those who still lived. And the galaxy would never be the same. In the aftermath of the massacre, the Empire believed the threat was over. But in truth, it had only just begun. The experiments began quietly at first, with the children unaware of the true nature of their captivity. They were told that their participation in the Empire's program was for the greater good, that they were being chosen to shape the future of the galaxy. But the reality was far more sinister. The children were subjected to a series of genetic alterations, biochemical treatments, and mental conditioning designed to unlock the dormant potential within them. The goal was simple: to manipulate their developing minds and bodies, turning them into powerful telepaths, seers, and manipulators of the physical world around them. At first, the results were promising. The children demonstrated heightened awareness, their senses sharpened to levels far beyond normal human capabilities. They could sense each other's emotions from miles away. They could communicate with one another without speaking, their thoughts merging in a silent web of interconnected minds. But as their powers grew, so too did their instability. The experiments that were meant to push them beyond human limits often backfired. The children's abilities were unpredictable, their minds fracturing under the strain of forced growth. Some developed extreme levels of empathy, unable to cope with the flood of thoughts and emotions around them. Others became trapped in violent mental loops, unable to control their newfound powers, which led to tragic accidents the Empire quickly swept under the rug. Still, the Empire pressed forward. They had invested too much in these children to let them fail. For years, the program continued, its scope growing, its methods becoming more extreme. The children were isolated from one another, their contact with the outside world limited to a handful of guards and scientists. They were conditioned to believe they were the future of the Empire, that their existence was necessary for the preservation of order across the galaxy. And in a twisted sense, the children began to internalize this belief. They were told that their powers were a gift, that they were special. But as their powers became more refined, so did the realization that they were not special, they were dangerous. The Empire's leadership, led by an elite council of generals and high-ranking officials, grew increasingly concerned. The children's potential was not only undeniable, it was terrifying. These young minds, now bursting with abilities far beyond human comprehension, had become a ticking time bomb. While the Empire had hoped to use them as weapons, they had become a threat to the very structure that held the Empire together. The Council feared that if the children's powers continued to grow, they would become a force capable of toppling the entire regime. What they once saw as a tool to control the galaxy was now a potential weapon that could end their reign. As the years passed, whispers of rebellion began to stir. The children, now teens, started to develop a shared sense of identity, even though they had been kept isolated from one another. They began to communicate in ways that were impossible to detect, using their powers to send messages to each other across vast distances. It was subtle at first, small hints of resistance, but the leaders of the Empire were aware of the potential for something much larger. The psychic bonds between the children had become stronger than anyone had anticipated, and with each passing day, their abilities grew. And so, the decision was made. The Empire would not risk an uprising. The time had come for the children to be eradicated. They had been born into captivity, their lives nothing more than a series of experiments for the Empire's greater good. Now, they would be erased, every last one of them. The order was issued in secret. A fleet of ships was dispatched to the remote facility where the children were held. The plan was methodical. The children were to be executed in a manner that would leave no trace behind. The massacre would be swift, their deaths quick and clean, hidden from the eyes of the galaxy. The Empire would claim they had been killed in an unfortunate accident, a containment breach, a failed experiment. No one would ever know the truth. But in the dark corners of the facility, things did not go according to plan. The children, already linked by their shared psychic abilities, sensed the coming disaster. Some of them had begun to notice the strange movements of the guards, the subtle shifts in the energy of the facility. They didn't fully understand what was happening, but they knew something was wrong. As the Empire's forces closed in, panic spread among the children. But there was no escape. They were locked in, sealed away from the outside world. And yet, within the chaos, something unexpected occurred. One child, Kala, a 15-year-old girl, tapped into a power unlike anything the Empire had anticipated. Kala had always been different. Her powers were stronger, her connection to the psychic network more profound. Unlike the others, she was able to sense the true nature of the Empire's plans long before the massacre was set in motion. She saw glimpses of her own death, felt the crushing weight of the Empire's betrayal. But instead of succumbing to fear, Kala did the unthinkable. She reached out, not just to the other children, but to the vast expanse of the galaxy. With a burst of psychic energy, she sent a warning, a psychic scream that reverberated through space, breaking through the mental barriers the Empire had worked so hard to maintain. The message was simple, yet urgent: flee now. The Empire is coming. At the moment of the massacre, as the Empire's forces stormed the facility, Kala's psychic signal reached its destination. Her warning spread to the farthest corners of the galaxy, carried on the currents of her thoughts. The children were slaughtered, but not before they left behind a final, desperate message: humanity was not to be underestimated. The Empire had underestimated the power of the human spirit, and now, it was too late. The warning had been sent. The moment the Empire decided to end the experiment, the decision was framed as a mercy killing, an act meant to spare the galaxy from a threat that had grown beyond anyone's control. The children, now scattered across multiple research facilities, were nothing more than liabilities, their powers too great to be contained. What the Empire had failed to foresee was that the children had grown beyond their grasp in ways they hadn't anticipated. As their psychic powers developed, so too did their awareness of the forces manipulating them. They had started to question their existence, their purpose, and even the truth behind the Empire's promises. The massacre order was swift. It came without warning, without any real explanation given to the guards or scientists assigned to oversee the children's containment. The decision was top-down, coming from the highest echelons of the Empire's command structure. The children were to be eradicated, every single one of them, before their powers could fully mature. It was not mercy, it was fear. The Empire feared what these children might become, beings capable of breaking the very system that had kept the Empire in power for centuries. But one child, Kala, was different. She had always been a curious and strong-willed individual, even before her powers began to manifest. As the other children struggled with the chaos inside their minds, Kala was more focused, more driven. She could sense the growing unrest among the others, their confusion and pain as they were slowly being isolated and silenced. Yet, unlike the others, Kala had developed a unique ability, one that even the Empire had not fully understood. She had learned to push her mind beyond the confines of the research facility, reaching out to other children across vast distances. Kala could hear their thoughts, see their fears, and, over time, she began to realize that there was something fundamentally wrong with the Empire's narrative. As the day of the massacre arrived, Kala's mind reached out, not to her fellow children, but to the vast network of communication channels within the Empire. She was connected to the very heart of the Empire's control system, a feat no one could have predicted. In that moment, she saw the extent of the Empire's corruption, their manipulation of entire populations, their use of fear to maintain order, and most disturbingly, their plan to eradicate not just the children but any human force that could potentially challenge them. Her warning was sent out not through traditional means, but via psychic projection. It was a desperate message, scattered across the galaxy, reverberating in the minds of those sensitive enough to receive it. The message was simple but powerful: flee now, before it's too late. The Empire will destroy us all. The rebellion that had been growing in the shadows of the galaxy, though small, took notice. The resistance groups, spread thin and struggling to make any real impact against the might of the Empire, now had the one thing they had been lacking: a rallying cry. A reason to fight. Kala's warning was not only an alarm to human colonies across the galaxy, it was a call to arms. But the Empire was not blind to the threat posed by Kala. As the massacre continued, the Emperor's inner circle scrambled to suppress any trace of the psychic warning. The Empire, with all its resources and vast intelligence network, could not fathom how a single child had gained access to their most secure systems. Their response was swift and violent, a desperate attempt to sever Kala's connection to the galaxy and eliminate any remnants of the threat she posed. Kala, however, was not the fragile child they thought her to be. She had known what was coming. While the others were being rounded up and executed, Kala had already planned her escape, tapping into the very abilities the Empire sought to control. She used her psychic powers to break through the facility's reinforced security, sending out a final, silent cry for help to the few who had managed to escape the initial slaughter. But as the Empire's forces closed in on her location, Kala made a horrifying discovery: she was not entirely human. In her moments of intense focus, as her mind reached out, she stumbled upon forgotten memories, visions of her past, fragments of a life she had never known. They were not human memories. They were memories of a race far older, far more powerful than humanity itself. It was as though her body, her mind, was simply a vessel for something much larger than herself. Her psychic powers, her precognition, and her ability to connect with others across vast distances were not just human abilities, they were the remnants of an ancient, long-extinct species that had once challenged the Empire's dominion over the galaxy. Her awakening, the full realization of her powers, marked the beginning of something far more dangerous than anything the Empire had anticipated. With this newfound understanding, Kala's mission became clear. She was not just a survivor of the massacre, she was the last hope for humanity. She was the bridge between the ancient past and the human future. And with the Empire closing in, Kala knew that she had only one chance to turn the tide in humanity's favor. She would lead the resistance, not just as a child, but as the inheritor of a legacy that spanned millennia, a legacy that the Empire had long sought to erase. The war for the galaxy was about to begin, and Kala was ready to lead it. The question was no longer whether humanity could fight back against the Empire, it was whether the Empire could survive the storm that was coming. The slaughter began without mercy. In every facility, soldiers and scientists alike followed the orders given to them, indifferent to the lives they were extinguishing. The children, too young to understand fully the magnitude of what was happening, met their fate with a mix of confusion and terror. Yet even as they were hunted down one by one, some fought back. Their powers, raw and unrefined, surged in bursts of unimaginable energy, telekinetic waves that shattered walls, psychic blasts that incapacitated their captors, and precognitive visions that allowed them to anticipate every move the Empire made. For a brief moment, it seemed that the massacre would be anything but a quiet slaughter. But the Empire's soldiers were prepared. They had anticipated the children's attempts to resist and had developed weapons designed to suppress their powers, powerful neural inhibitors and psychic dampeners that nullified the children's abilities. It wasn't long before the chaos died down, and the children, one by one, were silenced. The vast majority fell to the Empire's overwhelming force, their lives snuffed out before their potential could ever be fully realized. Kala, however, was different. She had anticipated this. She had foreseen the massacre through the flashes of visions that had plagued her for months. She knew that the end was near, and so, she made her decision. Instead of succumbing to the slaughter like the others, Kala used the very abilities the Empire sought to suppress to escape. Through a combination of telepathic manipulation and pure willpower, she distorted her own reality, creating an illusion so powerful that even the Empire's most advanced psychic dampeners couldn't detect her presence. As the massacre raged on, Kala vanished, slipping through the cracks of the Empire's tightening grip. She left behind nothing but a psychic imprint, a trail of fragmented thoughts that would later serve as the warning for humanity. Kala's mind reached out to every corner of the galaxy, sending a single, desperate message: flee now. Her warning echoed in the minds of those who had once been oblivious to the Empire's machinations, those who had never even known the extent of the horrors the Empire was capable of. But as the message spread, so did the question: why had Kala survived? How had she escaped when so many others had fallen? And more importantly, what did it mean for the future of humanity? In the aftermath of the massacre, the Empire sought to cover up their actions, erasing any trace of the program and dismissing any talk of the children's psychic abilities as a baseless rumor. They went to great lengths to suppress information about the massacre, using their immense control over the media and galactic communication networks to bury the truth. But Kala's message could not be undone. It reached far and wide, crossing the vast distances of space, slipping past the Empire's censorship. Slowly, across human colonies scattered across distant planets, whispers began to spread of the atrocities committed by the Empire. Fear began to settle in. The warning had been received, but it raised even more questions than it answered. On one of the many human colonies, a former soldier named Yarrick, who had long retired from service and moved to the outer fringes of the galaxy, received Kala's message. Unlike the vast majority who dismissed it as a bizarre and unsubstantiated rumor, Yarrick understood its significance. He had been stationed on one of the Empire's most strategic planets years earlier and had witnessed the early stages of the Empire's attempt to control human psychic potential. He knew, firsthand, that the Empire's reach was vast and that their cruelty knew no bounds. And so, Yarrick took it upon himself to investigate further. He reached out to his former comrades, now scattered and living under assumed names, and together they began to piece together the story of the Empire's hidden program. What they uncovered was worse than they had imagined. Not only had the Empire eradicated the children to prevent the rise of psychic-powered humans, but they had also been manipulating the very genetics of humanity for generations. The children had been subjected to genetic splicing, biological enhancement, and extreme neural conditioning, all designed to create a race of telepathic warriors who would be loyal to the Empire. But the children had grown too powerful, too unpredictable. And in their growing strength, they had come to realize that they were not simply created for the Empire's use, they were the key to humanity's ultimate survival. Yarrick, along with his growing network of former soldiers, scientists, and resistance fighters, began to mobilize in response. They reached out to other colonies that had received Kala's warning and started forming an underground resistance. They knew that the Empire's plans were far from over, that if they didn't act quickly, the Empire would turn its sights on the remaining human colonies and destroy them before they could organize any meaningful resistance. But as the resistance began to gain momentum, a new question emerged: could they truly stop the Empire? How could they fight back against an empire so vast and so entrenched in power? The massacre of 800,000 children had proven that the Empire was willing to go to any lengths to maintain its control. And yet, the survivors, led by Kala's message, were driven by a singular truth: humanity's greatest strength had always been its ability to survive, to adapt, and to fight back. In this fight for their future, the children, the survivors of the massacre, and those who had heard Kala's warning would become humanity's last hope. The Empire, in their arrogance, had underestimated one simple fact: humanity was not easily broken. The massacre might have extinguished the lives of 800,000 children, but in doing so, they had ignited the spark that would one day burn their empire to the ground. The warning was clear: flee now, but do not forget, humanity would rise again.